Yeah. Well, hey, it's good to see you all.
Good to see everybody.
Likewise.
Yeah. So, what I thought we would do is just kind of, as we always do, sort of freewheel it. I was thinking that when we have these conversations, because we have an audience that is not, specifically engaged on DNA issues exclusively, but I think the things that we come away from the ISHI Symposium, the International Symposium on Human Identification, in some ways is sort of like a barometer of other things that are going on in the forensic science community. So I kind of see this almost as like a policy and practices roundtable based upon our engagement with that audience. So what I thought we would do is kind of recap a little bit of what we went through and experienced in the 2025 meeting last fall, talk about some of the pressing issues that we saw emerging from the symposium, and you all are going to have a much better perspective as I did, because I had to cut out early because of, as you know, my schedule got jostled up because of my surgery, my cochlear implant surgery, and then kind of look ahead to what we think the significance of these issues are in the years to come. And then, Julie, what I thought I would do is have you kind of kick off talking about our workshop in 2026 symposium, which is going to be in Rhode Island in October. And Julie was sort of it was the brainchild of Julie, who took it upon herself to put together some really good ideas that I think we're all excited about. So we'll let our audience know about that. So
Better get prepared.
uh,
Oh
sometimes these
boy.
conversations are more fun when you're not prepared.
Well, I'm like, I have to pull up I guess I could pull up the website because I was like, do I even have like the abstract somewhere? So
Well,
um
maybe let's see. Why don't we kind of talk about what our takeaway was from the conference? So where was it that we met again? Yeah, it was down in Palm Beach.
Palm Beach, my
Beach.
neck of the
How could
woods.
I have forgotten that?
I don't know.
Yeah. It was a good conference, good venue. And one of the things that we should mention, and it's not just the issue symposium, this is affecting all of the conferences, is that costs are going up for these organizations. So the venues where we do this, the hotels, the cost of the labor to serve the food, the cost of the food itself, everything, and that gets passed on to the member. So everybody's dealing with this, and so I think that the folks at Promega, the planners of the ISHI Symposium, do a pretty darn good job considering the pressures that everybody's under right now with these costs. But maybe Julie, I'll start with you. How did you, since this was in your backyard, how did you feel about the symposium, and what were some of your key takeaways from it?
I thought it was, I mean, I say this every year, but I think it was one of the best issues yet. Granted, I didn't have to travel, but it was, to me, the venue was great. The content was great. The community was fantastic. I loved the variety of offerings that ISHI had this year, and the offsite event was kind of epic, if I have to say so myself. I mean, our Loggerhead Marina with the sea turtles is a pretty fun offsite event. So that was great. I mean, they always do a great job. I know this year it's going to be at a stadium. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but registration has opened for ISHI, so
Yeah,
that's exciting.
it's in October, and it's in Rhode Island, which is one of three states that I have to check off my list to visit all 50 states. So I'm looking forward to that. Pam, what was your thought on it?
Yeah, I would echo Julie's sentiments and just add that it's so different too when you can experience it with a student who's experiencing it for the first time. So I really relish when I have the opportunity to do some one-on-one, spend some of that one-on-one time with a student, and she had a blast. And Julie, she really enjoyed meeting you since you're serving on her research committee. But yeah, the offsite event, and I always leave just feeling so inspired. So there's always things to learn and take away that you want to kind of bring and put into your own trajectory. So it was
Pam,
very, very enjoyable.
Pam, you just recently attended the Academy meeting, right? The
I
American
did.
Academy of Forensic
Yes.
Sciences. I'm curious. So the Academy is sort of well known for attracting a lot of students and a lot of educators. How does ISHI compares as far as attracting students? Does it draw a lot of students and from academia and
Yeah, I think the academy definitely brings more students in. And again, I think it's more because it is so much more every discipline. And so those students who are sometimes on the fence or they're in a program that's more generic, that's going to draw them to that specific conference. Whereas ISHI is definitely those students who are preparing for a career in forensic DNA specifically. And so we're already dealing with a smaller student contingent, but it's definitely something I'm serving on the ISHI advisory board. And so it's something that we're definitely paying attention to and trying to see if we can make it more beneficial and less expense for students wanting to attend their first ISHI.
and we, Ray, one of the things that we did that was I think special was we had coaching sessions that were scheduled, and I think we owe it to to the conference organizers to give us a room where we could coach people one-on-one, and I think each of us had. Although Julie, you were really heavily committed with some educational programs, but I know that I know Pam and Ray and I had some coaching sessions that I think were pretty meaningful. Ray, do you mind talking a little bit about how you saw that and the benefit, and maybe how we might try to improve on it even more next year?
I thought it was an excellent sort of a natural progression of our discussions because we really try to, and I think that was a thing we did this time or this last time as well, was build in some real examples and have some sort of real involvement and discussion amongst the participants. And I think that's part of what we not only strive for, but it makes it very not only interactive, but a lot of good discussion, and people get sort of even more better consolidation of theoretical concepts when you can do it, for real. The idea of having the breakout room and the one-to-ones, I think, is a phenomenal opportunity because every single lab and people have issues or things they want to work on. And to be able to have somebody independent as a sounding board who's got nothing to do with your world, who can look at it independently, come with some fresh ideas. And sometimes it's just therapeutic to talk about it as well. So I think it is a real opportunity. And I think our challenge is how to make it something that we can weave into the conference. And this time we had our workshop was at the end, and I don't know that we made best use of the time because I would feel that after the workshop, people had a lot more ideas of what they could talk about but it was at the end of the symposium. So I think this time, if we are at the beginning, we'll probably have a lot more opportunities to do the one-to-one. So I think that's a real feature that I really have to hand it to Promega. It's a real opportunity to really enlarge our footprint and get a lot more interaction with the folks for real problems that they're dealing with today.
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges, as you said, Ray, is that the people want to go to these meetings, obviously, and they want to attend the educational programs. They want to listen to the speakers and so forth. And so to break away and go sit in a one-on-one session for whatever it is, 15, 30 minutes or more in a coaching session, which I would also call mentoring sessions. That coaching and mentoring can kind of go together. They're two different practices, but I think when we were doing this, we were doing both because we have so much experience collectively in forensic science. So yeah, my sense, and I know that Pam and I got to share together a coaching session that I thought was very, very impactful on that individual. So that was two coaches for the price of one, although there's no price. But yeah, I thought it was a really good experience, and we were doing a full day workshop on Monday next year, so that's going to leave us a lot of room as the week goes on to do more coaching. As far as the educational content and the discussions that you all heard and participated in, and you got to sort of observe and see what's on people's minds, what was your takeaway? And Ray, maybe I'll start with you on this one. Like, what did you see as sort of being some of the hot topic issues that are bubbling up within the forensic DNA community based upon what we saw at the symposium?
For me, there's a real challenge for people moving up where you move up because you have a lot of technical skills. And then invariably you get this opportunity, or sometimes I would say you're forced into it. It's sort of almost by default. Now here comes, and not when you're ready for it necessarily, here's a leadership opportunity. And I think there's a mindset where you have to have the technical skills in order to be a leader. But I think there's a misconception that you're going to keep doing all the technical stuff and you're also going to be the leader. And letting go of some of those things is a challenge. But then also building the leadership skills and letting people also have autonomy in doing their work, there's a real challenge in making that transition. And I think they see it also in people leading them, where there's a real delicate balance between micro management, being involved enough and checking right out. And I think we're heavily blessed with type A people in the DNA realm. And so their tendency is that how do you let go of something and let people learn and develop? And I think that dovetails into what we're going to be working on. Building people and building a pipeline is our next workshop. So I think it works well with what we're seeing, and is a real challenge for people, that smooth transition. And when the opportunity arises, that you're ready for it, because you just never know when it's going to come around.
Yeah, well, I mean, and we all know we've been there. I can't. I think I've shared this with all of you. Julie, I know you and I had a conversation about this a while back. That one of the hardest things for somebody to do in the forensic science laboratory is to transition away from the bench and into a supervisory position. Because one of the things that I think that we can all appreciate as well as anybody is that we don't only develop competencies and skills in these forensic disciplines, we develop an emotional attachment to it. So when all of a sudden you're pulled away from the bench and now you've got supervisory responsibilities, you're dealing with, personnel issues that pop up, approving vacation requests and all this kind of stuff, it can almost, I don't think it's an exaggeration to call it maybe traumatic with a small t, that it really hits you hard. Julie, you see it that way?
I do. This happened to me. I was 10 years on the bench. And then one day a supervisor came in and said, one of you guys is going to be running the laboratory. And that was kind of a shock. And I think I was nauseous for a while. And then I asked the question, if not me, who? So throw my hat in the ring and let's go. But I think before you're a leader manager, before you supervise individuals, you have an idea of quote unquote what a boss is. And it is usually not what you think it is. And so it was traumatic. I had so many conflicts in that first year, good and bad, with myself and with others, in trying to fit a mold that I had created for myself, and yet trying to hang on to that other identity that I had because that was comfortable. And so it was really, being in a management role has really transformed me as an individual, mainly because my focus then became learning more about myself so I could more effectively manage others. And then things kind of slotted into place. But I had to be willing to kind of let go of what I thought I should be, and try to open my mind to what I should be, and not be afraid of making mistakes along the way and being vulnerable with that. And it's really hard for so many people. And, I made missteps a lot. You still do. So, because I'm still a bench analyst at heart, I still take my proficiency tests, and I love those moments in the lab. It's almost like, nostalgic for when I go in the lab. And, you just have to realize that there's a different calling for you, and making that transition and giving yourself grace when you make that transition.
Yeah, and I think that it's important for people to recognize that when you become promoted. In fact, I just had a conversation yesterday with a coaching client about this topic, that when you become promoted into a position of management, so we're talking specifically about forensic science laboratory. So let's say you go from being, I'm just pulling this out of the air, a latent print examiner, to becoming either the technical leader or the supervisor of the latent print unit. It's really, really important for people to understand that you're changing professions. You're not just going into another office, right? You are changing professions. You're going into management. And I think the people that embrace that, and that's really a great place for coaching and mentoring, and to help people see that, because look what happens when you engage it. Look, Ray, former president of ASCLD, Julie, you're currently on the ASCLD board. That would never have happened if you didn't make that choice. But it's a tough damn choice to make, because you said it's our identity. And Ray, like, you went before you became the director, because you started in Canada, right? And then how did that lead to becoming the director of the New York State Police System?
Well, I really hit the deep end of the pool, and and without water wings too. No, I'll have to say I really was very, very lucky. And the luck I had was that I had an overlap with 3 weeks with the outgoing director. I cannot tell you how big a deal that was, because I went from a senior scientist with the RCMP, in my lab, and had tremendous autonomy on cases, right? So very technically driven, and I had trace evidence and DNA. And then I went right to becoming a lab director without really even being a supervisor. And I naively thought, and I'll still be doing some cases too, right? So in hindsight, it was so silly. However, that 3 weeks I had with the director just to get my feet under me was just a godsend, and build a relationship that if need be, I could reach back. So that idea of the smooth transition, the learning, the acting role, whatever we can do to soften that, you're still going to have, as Julie said, there's going to be things you do wrong, and you'll always have those. However, just a comfort level, and sort of knowing, here's the day-to-day and here's the bigger picture things. And I think for me, that's the new part. And not to say the technical people aren't looking at the bigger picture, but now you have to do that outreach way beyond what you've currently done. The liaison with now law enforcement, those leaders, your investigators, what you should be looking at for new technology, who's going to what conference, a lot of things that now are the outer facing part of your job, and the liaison, and things that frankly many of us are not very comfortable when we start off. It's a new role, but it's a tremendous opportunity to represent, because that gets your resources, bringing in new technology and so forth. So it was a tremendous learning curve. And then once I'd kind of done that, to move from place to place, on one hand, I wouldn't recommend it to people. On the other hand, I can't even tell you how valuable it was in a new role to have experience from an old role that was not the same department that you grew up in. And that's really tough, but incredibly invaluable experience. And frankly, if you don't burn bridges, you roll forward all those relationships, and they really, really help you in terms of your development. So on one hand, I don't want to wish a move on anyone. On the other hand, coming into a job fresh, without being the person that they knew when you were brand new, right, all the way up, that I think brings some real perspective and opportunities. It doesn't come without negatives, because when you don't know the people as well, that's a real challenge. On the other hand, you don't have the baggage, and you can be a little bit more objective. So it was a real experience. I really wouldn't trade it for anything. On the other hand, some real tough transitions when you throw in the moving and the family and all of that. So,
I want to hit Pam with a kind of a two-part question in just a second, with regards to takeaways from the conference, and then looking ahead, the significance of what was talked about. But one of the things that occurred to me as I was kind of getting set up for this conversation is that there's a good chance this fall in the 2026 symposium, there's going to be conversation about the Nancy Guthrie case and the potential for forensic investigative genetic genealogy to become used on that. I'm curious, and I'm going to kind of open this up to anybody that feels like, speaking to this. And again, we're not here to unnecessarily speculate, but this is for educational purposes. I do know that from looking at the program that there's always a lot of really relevant conversation about what's going on the genealogy side. From what we learned at the symposium, do we have kind of a sense on how, a case like the Nancy Guthrie disappearance could potentially come to some resolution unfortunately, with or without the survival of the victim, because we don't necessarily know how that's going to play out. But how much has forensic investigative genetic genealogy advanced in the last couple of years, and how can that potentially be used to bring some closure to this case? I'm going to kind of open that up to the three of you.
Well, I think it's important to follow what is in place at Pima County first, right? So I think there's a lot to be said about making sure that you're doing what your lab is set up for. So in this particular situation, yes, it's a very high profile case. I don't think they handle a lot of homicides. Typically, it looks like a fairly safe area. But again, that's me speaking as a non-Arizonian. But they have this contract with DLI that does not run out until March. And so their hands are kind of tied, even though there might be a lot of voices in their heads telling them to send the DNA to certain places. They have to do where they have those contracts with. And so I think it's really important to recognize that we can all have opinions from the outside in, but we really need to support one another in the initiatives. I've seen like a lot of just kind of almost just naysaying, and they should have done it this way, they should have done it that way. Well, hindsight's always 2020, and you don't know how you're going to handle that type of a high profile investigation until you're right into the weeds of it. So I think it's really important as a forensic community that we support the labs and the individual analysts doing that work first, before we try and attempt these conversations that don't necessarily need to exist yet. Arizona is also doing familial DNA through CODIS, and nobody's really talked about the differentiation that I've seen, at least on all the interviews I have seen. Nobody has really said, let's do familial before we start having the FIGG conversation, which I think is also really important. Let's use the tools that exist before we move forward to FIGG, thinking it's the be all end all of everything. And I see Ray shaking his head a little bit as our FIGG expert. So I definitely don't want to spend too much time on it. But I think if I had one big message, and it's important for young leaders in the field too, to know that they're going to get support. I think we're battling each other. It's like almost the battle of the experts on TV right now, and it's not going to do Nancy Guthrie or her family any justice if we can't all agree to support what that sheriff's lab is doing.
Well, and I think, it's almost like we're going to come to a day when they're going to start reporting these kinds of cases on ESPN, because we treat it like a sporting event, and it just doesn't work that way. Ray, what was your take on this?
Okay, several things. No particular order, but I'll start with media. Recognize that you are not going to try a case, nor should you. And there's going to be a lot of pertinent details that are not going to be in the media. So don't judge and don't weigh in. So I'm certainly old retired guys probably can in theory only, but you're not going to. The University of Idaho quadruple homicide was a great example. There was a lot of people really criticizing the investigation, and boom, it was solved, right? They're not going to tell you what's going on. The whole concept of citizen sleuths, really, it's interesting for people. And, my heart goes out to the family, and people absolutely, with good purposes, want to help. you're not going to have access to the information, the crime scene data, and so forth that anyone really needs to do any kind of appropriate job. So for people to weigh in and criticize, just not the place. You don't have the information. I'll pivot to what we can do in our own jurisdictions, and that's the outward facing. You come to ISHI, you stay on top of the technology because they're going to look to you in the crime lab for information to say, what should we do? Because the experts are the forensic people, and you're going to have to be knowledgeable to inform, and you can't know everything. So you have to have the contacts and the people to say you can reach out to and say, I know Ray, I know Julie, I know John, I need Pam. And if we don't know, we know the person who does know. So you reach out to that community, and the value of networking is incredibly valuable to say, what can we do? Because you have to be, number 3, an advocate for your case. Here's what we've got, and recognize that just because this is what we do with the crime lab, we're good for the cases that we have our hands around. This is a unique case where you're going to have to press the limits. And unfortunately, some of us have been in it where you have those big cases, probably all of us, where your technology has limits and there's things out there that can be done. And to be able to take, put a new hat on and investigate further the technology and partner with people and have those conversations, to me, that's what can you do to bring the world of forensic science to your jurisdiction to help those rare case types. And I think that's where a lab can really rise above, or you can really struggle, because sometimes just trying to fit the same exhibit types into your square peg and round hole concept, where you have new technology that can make a difference. You have that rare sample, and you just want to make sure that you do the maximization for that sample. So for me, there's a tremendous amount of take home. The danger of the media in getting partial information. Nobody makes good decisions on a small amount of info. And being that outward facing representative, not just for the technology, but for the liaison and networking, is just incredibly invaluable. And I'd like to think they're a lot further ahead with that investigation than what we know. I'm seeing sort of the right players, multi-jurisdictional people weighing in, including the FBI and so forth, where they have the all of the good heads around the table to say, here's what we can do with those samples. So fingers crossed, there's a lot more going on, much like the University of Idaho situation where Kohlberger pled guilty. And then hopefully we can look back and say, what are the learning experiences? But this one, unfortunately, when cases drag on, you get a lot of second guessing, and that is very unfortunate. And we should not be trying ourselves in the media or people who are working on the cases. Is just no good comes out of that.
Yeah, because we do not know what's going on. We don't. You bring up a really good point, Ray, because I've often thought that if you could randomly get like 150 sheriffs and police chiefs and strap them to a chair so that they can't leave, and they have to sit through an entire forensic conference like ISHI or ASCLD or the IAI, they would come away, I promise you, they would come away going, I had no idea. I just kind of figure people come to these conferences and they go golfing. Like, seriously, because I've been to a lot of police conferences and there's a lot of golfing that goes on. Not at forensic conferences. They would be blown away by the information that is absorbed, how people attend these symposiums, and I'm not trying to generalize, but when you have a case like this, that's when you wish, geez, it would have been nice if I had sent some people to this conference, or if I, like you said, I had a network of people that I'm familiar with that I can reach out to get second opinions, to get advice. Particularly in the first 48 hours of an investigation like this. We're almost at a month. Have we passed a month yet?
Yeah.
So we're over a month?
Yeah, we're at like day 32.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, quick question. So this is typical. I'm a firearms examiner. Does the familial DNA, is it able to proceed faster than the full FIGG? Or is it about the same?
Totally depends. So we did in New York familial searching. So familial searching, because you use the STR profile, that part, the actual search to develop potential family members is pretty quick. The problem is it's a very blunt tool, and you're going to capture people that aren't family members who just happen to share a lot of DNA, because these are big databases that you're searching. It's only your state database. You can't do it federally, but in New York State, we had 800,000+ people. You're going to have adventitious matches, which are not truly family members. So we had to then do Y testing. So that stretches it out, and depending, we cut it off at something like 100 samples to do the top 100. It still took you a couple of weeks to do, maybe more. And then you had a lineup because you could only do so many at a time, right? So even if you hurried it up, you're probably talking a couple of weeks. With FIGG, you could still be in the same timeline, but the total dependence there is once you have the profile, which is its own thing, how close in centimorgans do you get relatives that match? And let's just philosophize on this case. If this is a person from out of country who doesn't have any close relatives who migrated to the US and took these genealogical tests, and this is a huge thing, entered themselves into a database that law enforcement is permitted to go into. Most databases, 23andMe, Ancestry.com, and I could get going on their terms of service, but they don't allow any law enforcement usage of that. So you're down to only 2 main databases, and somewhere in the vicinity of 3 to 4 million profiles that they can compare to. If you get a very low or centimorgan match, which is a third or fourth or much more distant cousin, you can spend months on those family trees. Or if you have somebody who's been in the country for a few generations, has lots of family members in that database, they can be solved in days or even hours. So it really depends on the person and where they're coming from, and the heritage that they have for the background. So that for me is, and that's a lot of again, what you see on TV, but it is physically, Tucson's very close to the border, and there's reasonable thoughts that the person could be of descent that is very, recent to America. And as a result, if you get very, very distant matches, it can be a real bear to solve, and especially if there's endogamy and other things. So I'm going to say, it's tremendously variable on the genealogy. Can be from hours if you get a close match to unsolvable or months and months.
Julie, from your perspective on this, does a case like this, the Nancy Guthrie case, does it have the effect, or do you think it could have the effect of putting pressure on some of the existing administrative and policy guardrails that are in place, and that can be a good thing in terms of efficiencies, but it can also be a bad thing in terms of control of the data, constitutional rights, and so forth. Talk a little bit about that, how you think this could have an impact long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these high profile cases, resources are never an issue with that. Like, they'll throw the kitchen sink at it, but I think sometimes logic can see its way out of the conversation, where perhaps the conversation isn't slowed down enough to really look at all the pieces and parts. It's just like, what can we do? What can we throw at it? And oftentimes in high profile cases, the laboratory's position has been to slow the investigation down. And I'm really proud of being from an agency who actually looks at us and says, okay, what do you think? Because we will bring an air of reality to this. If you do this, this is what's going to happen. And sometimes I see our role as protecting them from themselves, because they hear all of these tools that are out there. They know that, yes, you can, get nuclear DNA from a hair strand, but then what? How can that be used then in a trial down the road? Like, what are the implications? So you get a foreign DNA profile from a hair root, or a shaft of hair that is nuclear in nature, but I can't do my traditional STRs in an accredited forensic laboratory and compare it back to the evidence. So how does that impact the case down the road? So a lot of what I see in these high profile cases is kind of like, okay, take a deep breath, really think through what's going to happen. If I do this, what happens down the road? And so sometimes I have to do that conversation with them. I'm like, you can do this, but what is the repercussions down the road? Can you arrest on this? Will, sometimes that does mean bringing in your prosecutor and having them weigh in legally. If we don't go through an accredited laboratory, are we going to be able to use this data in court? And it's been my experience with law enforcement, and I support this. Sometimes an answer is better than no answer. And initially, when there were unaccredited FIGG laboratories or laboratories doing that, when traditional DNA analysis had not borne fruit for an investigation, these families with unidentified human remains or missing persons or any types of cases, they don't care. They just want that answer. And so I can see that part of it, but you do need to think about the repercussions of what's being done and knowing the limits. And specifically in this case, if some of the media reports are to be believed, because that is one of the main things that I don't know, is I hear a lot of different things and none of us have the true picture, is that we're dealing with mixed DNA profiles. We don't know if they're actually from the perpetrator because there is no ground truth. Like, we don't know what ground truth is. So we're thinking that it might be from the perpetrator, but they're also mixed DNA samples, which complicates everything further, including FIGG. And I think initially when you had mentioned FIGG, you were like, what are the advancements that have been made in FIGG? And FIGG can handle mixtures better, but it still has its limits. And so I think we might be in it for the long haul, from, building on Ray's comments about someone, new to the country or whose family doesn't participate in the databases. Eventually, I do believe we will know whose DNA that is, but I don't know when that might be.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Pam, Ray, did you say something real quick? Oh,
Yeah, and I just sorry to interrupt you, Pam, but just really quick, the challenge we've got is you can't make chicken salad out of chicken scratch, if you know what I'm saying. So that you have to have good evidence that is connected to the suspect. And you would think when you go into a home that anything there shouldn't be there, but to find something that this had to be from the suspect, you're going to find other people's DNA. That's just the way it works. And then when you leave the home, gloves out in the desert, while you'd like to think maybe, but mass-produced objects, no connection to the crime, you start to go on these wild tangents, and so you can't make it out of nothing. But to find something that this had to come from the suspect, right? Sexual assault, wonderful kind of case type. When sperm is there, you kind of know, how it had to get there, right? And that becomes a real challenge where, as Julie's saying, the specifics of you have to, this is pertinent and this is not. And you start to, because of the resources in a way, you start to go down these tangents that in the end, if it's like, what does this actually mean? Now, on the glove, if Nancy Guthrie's DNA was on one side of the glove, you're off to the races. I'm not hearing that. Who knows? But any glove out there that's not related to the crime scene, that's a perfect example. How the heck do you know when it's not? If it's sitting outside the door, that's one thing, or inside the house, we don't know any of that.
Yeah. Pam, I want to give you the last word on this as, professor and director of the forensic science program at Duquesne. I'm kind of curious what your students are saying about this, or how they're sort of interpreting it, and to what extent are you discussing it in your classes?
We're discussing it from the standpoint again of why do we deserve to know so much as a public, right? So many other countries handle cases much tighter to the vest, even when public pressure builds up. And so I do fear that we have gotten to the point where it's this never-ending vicious cycle where the public's pushing to know more and the media is trying to answer the public. But in the weeds of this, we're hurting investigations. And the truth of the matter is, besides the family, none of us really deserve to know anything that's going on in this. And so the time of sheriffs coming out and making announcements every day, should that time be better spent being more strategic in that home and looking for areas where the suspect may have touched an item where their DNA is left behind versus scouting out a mile and a half to 2 miles down from her home and finding this random glove at the side of the road, right? So I think um, we as American citizens, we need to kind of pull the reins back on true crime a bit and realize this is a person. This is a person who has a lot of family that care about them. And we want to bring that person home, whether it's alive and well, or at least the remains so that the family can do a proper burial. But it is very hard right now to be a professor with so much true crime front and center, and kind of bring it back to the people that really matter in this story. And at some point, we'll be able to talk about all the ins and outs of that case, just like we did with Idaho and Brian Koberger. But for right now, we shouldn't speculate, and we shouldn't, God forbid this comes up with a name and it's somebody just truly random who may have been just changing their tire on the side of the road, right? Like, we've got to be very cautious about what we do with those DNA matches and how we handle that person essentially becoming a high profile either witness or perpetrator in this story.
Yeah, and if you do it wrong, boy, you can send a case on a wild goose chase that you can lose a lot of time. And I mean, we've all had our major cases, and we know how that public attention. It goes back, Pam, to, and I really do believe, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this, that we sort of live in a win-loss culture. It's sort of a sports-related culture. Okay, it's first quarter, crime just happened. Okay, well, now we're getting into the second quarter. We don't have a suspect, but we're collecting evidence. Oh boy, now it's the third quarter. I wonder if the victim's still alive. And you get the feeling, to use that analogy, shamelessly so, that you have this feeling like we're in the fourth quarter in terms of, the chance of bringing her back alive, but we don't know. I think the family has every right and reason to feel hopeful, and let's hope that, hope for a safe return. Pam, I want to come back to you and get your final thoughts on this symposium, and as an educator, what you saw as being some of the signals about what some of the more important consequential issues are going to be in the field in the next several years, or next few years even, because things are changing so quickly.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I definitely think, we've covered FIGG. I definitely think the future, there's a lot of good things that can be developed with FIGG, as long as I think the rails are coming, Ray, with more accreditation and better safeguarding of the uses of FIGG. Rapid DNA, I think there's a nice place for rapid, again, as long as it's used in the way that it's supposed to be being used. We saw and had a lot of good, like maybe offline conversations about activity level. I definitely think that's an area where there's still a lot of fear in the court system. I think there's a lot of fear on behalf of analysts having to testify these days and what questions they're going to have to answer.
Can you, Pam, would you mind
level.
explaining that? That's something that has been coming up a lot in some of the social media professional posts, like on LinkedIn, this concept of activity level. Can you just quickly explain for our viewers and listeners what that means?
Yes. So it's this idea of you might generate a DNA profile, and then you're getting asked about, what, and Julie might be able to answer this better, but what circumstances may you have gotten this DNA profile here? Was it transfer event? Did somebody do either secondary or tertiary touching of that knife handle, and that's how their DNA got there? So you're making all these sorts of situations and trying to give a probability to those to determine whether or not that DNA is truly there or could have been from some event that transpired that had nothing to do with the actual crime. And Ray and Julie, please tag along on this conversation if I said anything incorrectly.
No, I think you said it fine. I mean, it really is, it's tying back the DNA to profile to how did the DNA get there, and asking analysts to testify to the how it got there, when honestly, unless there was a video camera, you really don't know how it got there. And staying in your lane as a testifying analyst to be able to offer assistance to the triers of fact with the behavior of DNA, but not extend yourself too far where you're getting into a realm where, you know, you're essentially, were you at the scene? How can you say that the blood on the knife handle got there because this guy sitting in the courtroom cut himself, then handled the knife and then stabbed the person? Because that's where they're leading to. It's they're leading to, oh yeah, he was holding the knife when he stabbed the person, and that's what the jury's going to see. And it is inappropriate right now with the tools that we have in the United States to do that, but there is a fine line, and Ray has done some research and talks about it all the time. But it has created an extraordinary amount of fear in my analysts and in any analyst, because they don't want to get in trouble, quote unquote, for saying something incorrectly or extending beyond their area of expertise. And what I've seen, and what I think the big problem is now our testimonies are actually losing value because no one will say anything, which is not appropriate either. So Ray is like, he's getting antsy. I know he wants to say something on that. So go for it, Ray.
Yeah, I want to say so much. So absolutely, and I'll loop it back to, and this goes for rapid, FIGG, activity level, every new technology we have. I think for me, it's I hate to go to a bit of a recipe, but it's true. We've got to train people, because absolutely, trace evidence was around for decades before here comes trace DNA. Follows the same general principles. We need some training. We need some coaching. We need some mentoring. Sounds just like leadership. Same idea with FIGG, you know, but you can't be everything. But there's going to be people, and especially plug for the ISHI meeting. All those people are there. They're giving workshops. They're giving presentations on here's the latest thing. That's why you need to be there, have your representatives there, and know who they are, so you can reach out. And that kind of looping back to, and one of the things I feel we really need to increase our focus on, and that is the crime scene. Because you get one shot at that scene, and there may have been phenomenally good evidence there, and now it's trampled by first responders or family members or what have you. And the idea that you got one shot at that scene, good in, good out, garbage in, garbage out. We have to recognize it, collect it, preserve it. And then we have these phenomenal tools to be able to determine that. But as Julie said, they still have limitations, but we can still say some things and being comfortable to say, okay, so there's DNA on the knife handle. What's your theory as to how it got there? Well, I shook hands with the real killer, and in turn, he touched it. Well, okay, then this is what would have to happen. Do you believe that scenario? Or is that more likely than the direct contact scenario? And so there's things you absolutely can say. And I don't think we should be paralyzed by, trying to be incredibly careful about not saying things that, and frankly, we do know. We do know a lot more than we think we do, in terms of, we do select these types of evidence to say, well, I'm going to look at the knife handle. Why? Because DNA transfers, and here's how much typically transfers. And we do have some research, albeit we have limitations. So you've got to be able to say, here's what I can say. Here's the limitations of what I can say, but we absolutely know it directly transfers. You get significantly left, but not zero, in a secondary transfer. Are you the plumber? Do you have a reason you were there? Oh, it is your kitchen. You're the husband. So guess what? Your DNA is going to be all throughout. We've seen cases like Amanda Knox and people who live in that area. Your DNA is going to be in your world. On the other hand, if you've got somebody, looping back to Nancy Guthrie, never was in the home, has no right to be there, has come from another county or another state, and voila, their DNA ends up in a mixture with Nancy Guthrie. Now you've got something, right? So very, very dependent on finding it, locating it, preventing contamination, because, you look at that Koberger case, the knife sheath torn off in the struggle, DNA from him on the knife snap. I mean, that's a smoking gun kind of evidence you hope happens in every case. I just hope to goodness that there is something similar that we don't know about in the Nancy Guthrie case, because barring that, sometimes a person just gets lucky committing a crime, and we don't have that great piece of evidence to tie back to them.
And we've all seen it more than once.
Yeah.
And one of the things that is just, I think it's funny as I think about this conversation we're having, like this is a must listen to, I would think, for any journalist or podcaster, like you were saying, Pam, that deals with true crime, because we're getting into some of the meat and potatoes of the nuances of these issues. But the one thing that is often not appreciated, I think, even among forensic experts themselves, is that forensic science is a question-dependent field. The answer that you get is going to depend necessarily on the questions that you ask. And so ask your questions carefully, right? Because we have to give our answers carefully. But I share the same concern that you mentioned, Julie, that I worry that we get so hesitant to answer questions because we're afraid of saying the wrong thing, that we're not able to really, in many cases, fully provide support to the investigation. I hope that changes in the coming years. Julie, I'm going to have you kind of close us out and talk about, we're excited about this workshop that you sort of designed, well, you designed, and this is going to be our full day Monday workshop, is what it's looking like in Rhode Island for the 2026 ISHI Symposium. Why don't you give us a quick rundown on what we're going to be doing?
I would be happy to. So I will say that this brainchild kind of came out of a side conversation I was having with Brian Hoey, who, if you were at the last ISHI Symposium in Palm Beach, where I live, they did a really amazing panel. And it was kind of like a mental health panel. It was really great. And so we kind of talked about that. And I said something about building our brand as a leader. And then that kind of spiraled, and he just kept talking. And I was like, you know what? I feel like this has some things I can get into with as far as Forensic Leadership Alliance topic, where we can really take that, tease it out, and develop a nice workshop out of it. So a couple years ago, we did a workshop called Building the Forensic Science Pipeline, where we talked about hiring forensic scientists and how to encourage that, where our hiring pools, went from an Olympic-sized swimming pool to a kiddie pool, and what are we going to do to really get those good candidates in and to develop them out. So this workshop, which I'm gonna cheat and I'm gonna look at the name of the workshop, is called Build Your Brand, Build Your Culture, Putting Success into Succession Planning. And so the crux behind this is a lot of labs don't intentionally plan for succession planning. And it's a word that we're like, oh yeah, what are you doing for succession planning? But no one really knows what they're doing, because a lot of us just kind of happened into this career. And so the crux of our workshop is to really make that more intentional by building your brand as a leader, but also building your brand as a laboratory or as an agency. And kind of the tagline is most forensic laboratories do not intentionally plan for succession, they survive it. And so our goal is to really, we want to build a laboratory where people want to be leaders. So our focus is kind of, three-pronged: building the brand of the leader, building the brand of the laboratory, and then building the brand of those future leaders, those interested in coming in. Brand building is kind of a buzzword now. A lot of people are talking about their brand. And so what I really like about this workshop is we are targeting those future leaders as well, not just the existing ones who want to attract people to their laboratory to build a nice succession plan, but also those individuals who think they might want to become a part of this and what they really need to do in order to, slot themselves in for success.
Yeah, well said, Julie. And it was just an amazing set of concepts that you kind of put together to structure that workshop. One of the things looking forward, as we often do, I tell you what, if there was some way, even if we could do it like through grant funding of some sort, if we could get like police chiefs, directors of state police, sheriffs themselves to come to an event like ISHI and spend a day with us where we can kind of help them understand, look, this, you're in the sworn command structure, but this is the impact that you have on your laboratory. And this is what your laboratory is trying to do, because you can be a laboratory director or a unit supervisor. And if you want to develop these brands and these concepts, you've got to have the support of the people up the chain of command, because if they take the attitude, hey, I'm the boss, I decide who the next leaders are, then they erode your succession planning from the inside out. And we're going to discuss that. I know I'm going to discuss that. Yep. So that would be a cool thing looking forward. Maybe we should pitch that to our friends at Promega and ISHI. But hey, we are out of time, and as always, it's just always a joy to kick these issues around. And people should know that the four of us, we have these conversations by ourselves over dinner, not just in podcast episodes. So we'll be getting together soon to plan our 2026 workshop, and we'll see you all there in Rhode Island. It's going to be fun.